Hey friends, happy Wednesday, the 8th of December. It's the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I am Father Bill Hill, one of the priests at Holy Spirit Catholic Community in Rock Springs, Wyoming. It's a good thing to be with you. I'll give you a daily reflection and then I invite you to read the readings prayerfully, turn off the screen, spend some time with God before you move on to other things. Today is a holy day of obligation for Catholics, and so I do have a link over on the sidebar to our parish bulletin. Rock Springs Catholics, you can grab a mass and find something that works for you. Those of y'all at another place, certainly please be attentive to your own parish's mass options, right? Okay. Immaculate Conception. The readings are a little bit goofy today because the gospel is what we call the Annunciation. It's the Archangel Gabriel telling Mary, announcing to Mary the plan of God's salvation and the conception of Jesus Christ. Now, what's confusing is that in 17 days we'll celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. So let's just be clear. This is a celebration of the conception of Mary. 9 months from now, September 8th, in the liturgy, we'll celebrate the birthday of Mary. On December 25th, we celebrate the birthday of Jesus. 9 months before that, we celebrate the Annunciation, the announcing of the conception of Jesus to Mary. So it's confusing here, but here we're talking about God, through the grace revealed, unleashed by Jesus Christ in his death and resurrection, God, in anticipation, preserving Mary from the stain of original sin. And then, unlike Eve, Mary choosing to live her life in conformity with the plan and the will of God, right? So both protected from original sin, but herself also fully alive in God. You know, it's hard for us to conceptualize because we think that sin is so important to our lives, right? Destroying our own relationship with ourselves, trashing our relationships with others, alienating ourselves from God. Like, that's part of the human experience. But this is the reminder that deep communion, that place of absolute integral authenticity, is part of how we were made. That all of the sin and the trashing, even though God brings redemption and new life out of it, is not part of the desire of God for us, right? Like, that's part of that call to holiness. The readings today especially speak to us of God who has done great things in Mary's life, but also through her yes to the entire world. Let me just say a word about the gospel, and then I'll look at that first reading from Genesis and St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Why are we reading the Annunciation Gospel 17 days before the birth of Jesus? It's because of the words of the heavenly messenger Gabriel. What does he say? Hail, full of grace. As the church reflected upon this over the course of the centuries and reflected upon our own experience of sin, we came to realize that this is a title of God spoken through a messenger full of grace. You know, and you can think about an ancient image of a clay pot, or you can think about a glass water glass that we would drink out of. If there's a chip, if there's an imperfection, if there's a crack, yeah, you can still use it, right? You can still put some water in that pot. You can still drink out of that glass. I might recommend rotating it so you don't cut your lip. But it's not full of liquid, but it's still doing its job. That describes us most of the time. You need a fully integral vessel, a fully designed creature that can then be full of grace. And the image, that I especially like is to imagine that water glass and the surface tension of the water that allows even the meniscus over the top, right? Full of grace, filled to the tippy tip top. And that's that image of full of grace that's coming to us out of the gospel. We hear of God who has designed this, and it's not a surprise that God does this before the birth of Jesus by preserving Mary free from the original sin. because we hear from the book of Genesis that even at the moment of the first rebellion of humans against God, God already is promising redemption. And so that is what's called the first proclamation of the gospel, the proto-evangelium. I will put enmity between your offspring and hers. The snake will strike at your heel, while you strike at his head. A reminder that the forces of evil will not dominate forever. From the very beginning, God has desired to bring all things into the fullness of love in Jesus Christ. And that's great news for us. St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians in that second reading. Before the foundation of the world, God chose you in Jesus Christ. And be mindful, he's talking to a very small Christian congregation in Ephesus. A couple dozen, maybe at most, right? Hear those words of Paul, inspired by God, spoken to you. Before the foundation of the world, you were chosen. You have a part to play. You have part of this to sing. And yeah, like all of us, bit players in the world stage and in the grand scope of history. But still, our voice, our yes, our participation, it matters. God chose you before the foundation of the world. Perhaps today we would just root ourselves in that call of God. It may not be the angel. It may not be the lights and the angelic choirs. But still, God has desires for creation through you. We can oftentimes think, oh, not little old me. But there's a fairly famous line, right? God doesn't call the qualified. God qualifies the called. We may have plenty of questions, just like the Virgin Mary did. Sit with those. But then ultimately, may her words be ours. Behold, I am the servant of the Lord, the handmaid of the Lord. May it be done to me according to your word. Read those readings prayerfully. Turn off the screen. Spend some time with God before you go on to other things. Be praying for folks that are having a hard time. God bless you all.